that you have to bring that rod tip.
You have to bring it
so
back
it's
here and then pop it
perfectly.
out. Yeah.
Well, you have to make it run with the kite line, because if not, all you do is you slingshot the clip 100 feet right back out, and then you just fucked it. So it's just like, and yeah, you see that a lot. Like, hey, point the rod right to the mate, but don't touch the mate, and you're gonna point it, and he's gonna loosen the clip for you or whatever. But then they gets close, and then they get excited, and they put the rod tip the other way, and it just shoop, sends the clip 100 feet up the line. You're like, all right, well, we'll figure that out.
Do it all over again.
And how did it start out? Like, what was the origin story?
Too much alcohol.
Really? Okay.
Says if God wanted us to have fiberglass boats, he would have given us fiberglass trees.
It's for fishermen. It's not for taking the wife and the wife's friends.
I think that it's a really, really pretty bit.
And then there was a blur that went by and ended up in the cockpit, as far as if I can remember correctly.
Welcome back, State of Sport Fishing Podcast. I'm Nick Carullo. I'm joined with me, my co-host Anthony Pino with Hooked Optics and Captain of the Blood Money. Today, our two guests are Bruce Pohlot and Zack Bellapigna, and I'll let these guys give the introduction of what these guys do. Thanks for joining us.
Happy to be here. I'll get started. Yeah, thanks so much for having us. We're both fans of the show here. So again, my name is Bruce Pohlot. I'm the conservation director for the International Game Fish Association. We quite a bit at the IGFA. We have, I'm the director of the conservation department. We have a variety of research programs. We have our flagship program is the IGFA Great Marlin Race. It's a satellite tagging program. We've put out over 500 tags now. We have probably the biggest database of billfish tracking ever collected. It's a citizen science program, which is kind of cool. So the way it works is we go to tournaments, we go to different events, and anglers will actually, it could be boats, it could be angling clubs, or individual people will sponsor a tag, and then they'll deploy that tag. And whichever fish goes the furthest during an event, a good example is like the Big Rock event. We get 7 tags sponsored. Whichever fish tag pops up the furthest from where it was deployed, they'll win that race. So it's like a little additional level of competition for that. And then at the end of the year, the tag that went the furthest will win the overall annual race. And, we have a trophy and stuff like that. But we also do some other stuff. We have a couple other research programs. We have one on golden dorado down in Argentina. It's a freshwater fish that is somewhat threatened by all the different human activity down there, specifically dams, things like that. And then we have a research program that we're just getting started. That's a roosterfish project. That's going to look at the genetics of roosterfish across their range. So basically, very little's been done on roosterfish at all. So we're trying to figure out how connected the population is between Mexico down to Ecuador, and whether or not they're mixing, whether it's totally separate populations. We just know very little. So it'll be some of the first research done on that. And then we do a lot of policy work. There's a lot of different things happening politically right now with different regulations, and we try to promote access for fisheries. What's one of the big things we fight for? There's a lot going on with the 30 by 30, America the Beautiful, where there's this talk of like MPAs, all that kind of stuff, and things that could potentially restrict fishing. So we're advocates to promote, where we advocate for recreational access, things like that. So our main mission is science-based, sustainable recreational angling, and to celebrate some of the major accomplishments, which is what Zack is going to talk about in terms of the world records and tournaments and stuff. So I think that's good.
Yeah,
great.
So I'm Zack Bellapigna. I'm the Angler Recognition Coordinator here at the IGFA. So what I manage is world records. So anyone catches a world record anywhere, they're submitting it through me for this office. I review them, process them, sign off, whether or not they're approved or rejected. We also do other programs. We have the Grand Slam clubs as well as trophy fish clubs. So it's certain, species of fish, snook, yellowfin tuna, dorado, roosterfish. If you catch one over a certain size, you enter the trophy club. We also do Royal Slams. So Billfish Royal Slam is a popular one for us. So if you catch every species of billfish over the course of your lifetime, you can apply for the Billfish Royal Slam Club, and you enter that club. I also, work with our rules, IGFA International Angling Rules, and then we work with our tournaments as well. We have 4 tournaments currently going on: Light Tackle Open, which takes place in South Florida, the Mediterranean Championship, which takes place in Italy, Permit Invitational, which takes place in Key West, and then we have our SoCal Swordfish Open coming up in San Diego in November. So mostly, spending my time answering rules related questions around here and then reviewing world record applications.
Nice.
Ooh.
Is that tournament in Italy? Just real quick, is that what type of tournament in Italy is that?
It's an offshore fishing tournament. We just started it. It was our first year back in July, I believe it was, like the first week of July. It was really interesting. I mean, obviously, I didn't get a chance to go over there, but I'm going next year. I kind of had, a frame of reference of what they were going after, but they ended up catching a ton of spearfish,
wow.
a lot of longfin tuna, and a lot of mahi, which surprised me. I didn't know there was that many over there.
Yeah,
They fish for bluefin a ton too. Those are kind of like what they're going after in swordfish. But they ended up, I think the winning fish were all points based, but like all spearfish.
Wow. And where's that out of?
It's out of Sardinia. I think Porta Rotunda is the town, but yeah, it's out of Sardinia.
Interesting.
Nice. It's my people.
Yeah,
That'll be
mine as well.
that'll be what I do for the rest of the night is try to figure out where Sardinia is and how we can catch
Yeah,
Mediterranean spearfish.
it's cool over there. They so a lot. I mean, obviously, we're an international organization, right? But we're based here in the United States, and a lot of our members are in the United States. But we also have a lot of our members over in like Europe and Egypt, for example. And that we're giving them an opportunity to participate in a tournament where it's not necessarily like right in their backyard, but it's close enough that we had a lot of teams travel over from different countries to participate.
That's cool.
It's so interesting, like with the internet, we all think we're so connected, and I mean the Billfish Instagram page I think is a phenomenal way to stay connected on the goings on around the world. But you hear a lot about obviously the States, Central America, and then a little bit of Brazil, and then you hear Australia, but you don't hear much about Europe and Africa. And I didn't know. I mean, you always hear about like the spearfishing, that there are Mediterranean spearfish, but you don't know who catches them, who's good at it, where are the best places to go, so it's
there's
such
guys
a good
over
resource.
there. Yeah, there's guys over there getting after it. Like there's real deal guys over there. Yeah,
Wow.
they fish hard, and they've got. I mean, it's a fish that's kind of like budding a little bit. It's like kind of new.
Yeah.
But there's a few guys that have it like locked down, and they're killing it. I think Mallorca is the other place they're really getting into them, which is on like the other side of Sardinia.
Spain, right?
In Spain,
yeah, Spain. It's all the same, like general, like North Mediterranean Sea.
Oh,
Gotcha.
It's a cool fish. I mean, we know almost nothing about it. It's I honestly didn't even know it was a species until I started this job. And we actually tagged a few with a group there at SCN in Italy. And they're tiny. It's hard to keep a tag in them. But yeah, we were able to get them and get there. They don't really go anywhere. They sort of just swim around the same general area. But yeah, it's a cool little fish. I'd love to see one in real life at some point.
We gotta get over there next year, Bruce.
Hey, since we're on the subject of spearfish, the round scale spearfish.
Yeah.
If I here in Ocean City, which I've caught a couple yesterday, and if I would have caught one of the 3 blues we saw yesterday, would I have caught a grand slam if I caught a blue, a white, and a round scale spearfish? Because I personally don't think I would have caught a grand slam, because I just think it's a white marlin. It's a different fish, but it's too much like a white marlin.
I'll let Bruce go first before
Let's go.
Make a statement.
I want to settle this
of
debate here.
In terms of tournaments, white and round scale they're not differentiated. So you can bring a round scale and weigh it at the White Marlin Open, and it's going to count.
I would have weighed one of these things yesterday.
They have it historically. They think that a solid percent of the fish that have been brought to tournaments were round scale, but they're so close that it's really hard. There's 2 things that you can tell. There's their gills on the underneath of them in a round scale will come back further on the gills. They're called brachiostegal rays, I think. And that's basically that like area under the gills that they're like rays that come down. That will go further back in a white. And then the other thing that'll go further back in a round scale. And then the other thing is the space between the anal vent and the anal fin. That is much bigger in a round scale spearfish. So, if you look at it, like if you have pictures and you want to send me a picture so that I can tell Jason, our president, who was in my position for many years before, he can tell like immediately. He's really good at it. But, other than that, that's really the only difference. And even that is kind of hard to tell. So as far as I know, every tournament is still going to allow a round scale to be weighed as a white. And then you can do genetic studies, which is what they did. That was back when people were talking about hatchet marlin and that kind of stuff, which, you know, that's not a real, that's just a round scale. But in terms of like a slam from IGFA, I'll let Zach.
No, I mean, if you could prove that it's a spearfish, then yeah, it would be. So basically, it's three different species of billfish in the same day.
We're back to the same conundrum that we had from the beginning. This is all of this divides the Ocean City fishing community up here or the Mid-Atlantic altogether pretty.
So I mean, I could just tell you from where I'm sitting in this chair, right? If you catch 3 separate species of billfish in the same day, that's an IGFA billfish grand slam. So if you're proving to me that it is not a white marlin and it is a round scale spearfish, then I have to count it as an inshore grand slam or a billfish grand slam.
But the expert talking about science here saying that a white marlin and a spearfish are the same damn thing.
Well,
you hear that,
Ocean
City?
It's a different
do not.
Species, but
no, I don't care.
They can't. It's too difficult for the white. Like one of those tournaments, any of the tournaments, it's too difficult for them to tell. Like from a release perspective, the amount of time it would take for you to manipulate that fish to take the pictures you need. It probably end up killing the fish. So it's
people here in Ocean City. You have not caught a grand slam if you catch a blue, a round scale, and a white.
Yeah. To your credit, what I said that you'd have to prove, like without a shadow of a doubt, that it is that separate species, which I think would, based off of what Bruce just said, would be nearly impossible to do.
No, you'd have to do genetics. You'd have to pay somebody to do it. Yeah.
No one here in Ocean City is proving anything. That's why we have to still weigh fish to win tournaments here. So.
I was just there a couple weeks ago, so it's a cool spot, man. I like the orange crushes.
Yeah. You hear that, everybody? Like I said, in Ocean City that thinks they've been catching grand slams, you have not.
Wait, Bruce, so there's no hatchet, you said?
There's no such thing as a hatchet marlin.
It's a
There's
myth.
white marlin and a round scale spearfish.
Bruce was waiting for this question.
And they're all
That's
basically
the
white
one
marlins.
I get a lot. And yeah, they're all really similar to white marlin.
But how come when you look at you look at some books and they'll show the hatchet and with a different name, I thought. Like a different
I don't there was a study done, I think it was John Graves at VIMS a few years ago that basically found out that wasn't really a separate thing. So they published that, and I had never heard of the hatchet marlin when I started this job, and Jason, who's the expert, because he was working with all those guys throughout the process, said, no, there's no such thing as a hatchet marlin. So I looked it up, and it turns out genetically there isn't a separate species. I mean, maybe there was one caught that was like something was different about it, but no, it's white and round scale.
Gotcha. Which are the same fish.
Which are pretty for tournament purposes, it's the same fish.
There you go, Anthony.
Well, I'm glad we got that out of the way. That conversation was in memory of a friend of mine, Frankie Petalino, passed away. That we would joke to each other when we saw people saying they caught grand slams, catching a blue, a white, and a round scale. We would just shake our heads, and I'm glad we got that out of the way. I feel great now. Thank you, guys.
You look happier.
I'm happy.
Nice.
So cool. So Bruce, I got more questions.
Yeah.
We'll start with, I guess we'll delve into Bruce's side of things, and then we'll go to Zach, because I have plenty of questions for the both of you. But the Great Marlin Race, I'm super intrigued. I wish you guys had put more on YouTube about where those things go, because I find that so interesting. I've looked at all those, and they're barely a minute and a half, 2 minutes long, where you see all the lines go everywhere. I don't know how hard or easy that is to do, but it's so interesting to see, where they go from certain places, depending on where you catch them.
Yeah. It's something that it is, it takes a little while, and it's just me running the conservation department right now. So what I'd like to do is make videos for every single track we have. I think, some of them, even the short ones are so cool. I've been here, just under 3 years now, 3 years in March. And I started the day before everybody got sent home for the pandemic. So we had, when I first started, we had a little more time. I had time to make the videos and look at some of that old data. But once we got back in the office, things really took off, especially from the policy side. So haven't had a ton of time to make those, but truthfully, there was a major lull in tagging because a lot of people couldn't get to the places where they wanted to fish. Bermuda was one of our top tagging locations, and we haven't been able to tag there for a few years. A lot of the boats that typically sponsor tags weren't able to make it. So there haven't been as much, but we're starting to get a bunch back now. We had a really interesting one from Big Rock. It was placed last year, and it stayed in. We programmed the tag. So the IGFA Great Marlin Race is a collaboration with Stanford University, particularly Dr. Barbara Block. She's really well known. She's like one of the top scientists when it comes to animal tracking. She does like the Tag a Giant stuff. She does great white sharks. She does, all sorts of different things. But this is a group that really on top of their game. And we work together. They analyze all the data. We get these tags sponsored. But during the Big Rock tournament in particular, this fish traveled up the east coast of the US, all the way across and all the way down the coast of Africa, and then made its way most of the way back.
Wow.
So it did basically an entire Atlantic loop. And I forget the exact numbers, but I think it popped up maybe 1,500 miles away from where it was deployed. But the thing probably went 7,000 miles. Those don't hold me to those numbers, but it's an unbelievable track, and that's just one of many. Before we started this, we were talking about our longest track, which is from a black marlin from Eastern Australia, and that thing went straight across the Pacific and popped up just south of Easter Island. So it's and in 180 days, I think it was, maybe even less. So these fish are traveling unbelievable distances.
Do you think that fish, this is going to sound weird because I'm a fisherman, but do you think a fish being hooked and caught, not even whether it's tagged or it's not, do you think the data shows that, if you hook and catch a fish, it leaves immediately? Does that experience of being hooked and caught, I mean, I'm sure in some places that are super bait heavy and they're feeding like Eastland Mujeres or Mag Bay or somewhere like that, where I've let fish go and literally watch it start eating again, that they just can't control themselves there. But I mean, I feel like sometimes they're like the experience of being caught, especially a bigger blue marlin on heavier tackle where you're fighting them for an hour or something like that. And then they get released and then they just are like, that was crazy. I don't want to ever do that again. They just swim.
They bolt out. Yeah. No, I have seen some of that. It can be a little bit hard to tell from the data. Just because
for sure.
of the way you're making, you visualize those tracks. But yeah, we see that a lot of times immediately after they'll go down to a depth that's maybe right around the thermocline, mixed layer, and it'll stay there. And the concept is that there's probably a little more oxygen for them there, maybe a little bit cooler. They can recover a little bit faster. But not everywhere. I put out maybe 100 tags. So I did my PhD at University of Miami, and I did it satellite tagging sailfish and blue marlin, and it was all done in Costa Rica and Guatemala. And those blue marlin, they don't leave. The fads are there, and they're sticking on the fads. I expected to see some migration away from that area, whether it be up towards Guatemala, down towards Panama. We had a couple swim over, near Panama, but they came back. And then some of these were on for 250 days, and none of them really left that area. We didn't see any of the, I think for blue marlin, we maybe put out 25, or I think we put out 30 tags, and 25 of them sent us back data. And not a single one left that general area. And right afterwards, they would leave that particular fad, but they weren't heading up to Mexico to get out of there. So and we do see that they were going down to it's tough in Central America because there's no oxygen at depth, so they can't really dive down. So they're they would dive down a little bit and try to recover, but for the most part they all survive. That's one nice thing about it, with a little bit of care and reviving them if they're on the line too long, it does work. But yeah, you definitely see a little bit of that in some places more than others.
Have you seen any bit of, you said, I guess that is a pattern there, but have you seen other patterns from other fish in other areas?
Yeah. So actually almost every location has its own specific pattern. There's one in Kona, where we tagged a lot in Kona. The Great Marlin Race started in Kona. It was before IGFA got involved. It started at the Hawaiian Invitational Billfish tournament, and then IGFA got involved later. And we've tagged in Kona, since the start of it. But those fish, particularly the blue marlin, they travel south and they go across the equator. And there's a bunch of complicated equatorial currents right along there. And during certain events like La Nina, El Nino, the water will change in a way that they don't make that trip south anymore. So they'll come up to the edge of like the northern equatorial current, and they'll stop, and they'll just kind of cruise along that edge, and they won't continue south. Where in other times of when it's that was during La Nina, but during El Nino they have no problem, they can cross. It's not a problem. I may have mixed that up. It's okay. But in Bermuda, we see a lot of the fish will leave Bermuda almost right away. And there's a lot of fish there, but we see quite a few of them. Maybe, I don't know, maybe half of them will head towards the US off like the northeast US coast, Grand Banks area, and then they'll hang out there for a little bit, go back and forth across the canyons, and then they'll shoot all the way across the Atlantic, and then they'll spend some time around the coast of Africa. So we see that quite a bit. In the Bahamas, we had totally opposite tags this past year. We had one that went immediately left the area all the way up the East Coast to like off Long Island, basically came all the way back down and popped up just north of the Bahamas. And then at the same time, a tag that was put out a week later, it never left that area. It sat there for 240 days and just zigzagged across East Africa and didn't go. And then the tag washed up on a beach somewhere south of there, and some random guy just found it and sent it to us. It was great. But yeah, they all have like their own unique thing, and I think it's part of the environment, the oceanography, that kind of stuff.
Have you guys tagged any fish on the North Drop in the BVIs?
So the only place we've tagged in the Caribbean is this past year. We just tagged off the DR. We put 2 tags in small blues there off the DR, but no, we have not. We've done quite a bit in Puerto Rico in the early days, but nothing recently.
There's
have
a
to
YouTube.
get some tags on the Temptress and Blood Money coming up here.
Yeah, there was I would be happy to do that if we ever catch something. Fishing has not been great in Ocean City this year, but it's great up above. So hopefully, there was one YouTube video. I guess it was out of Puerto Rico. Was where a lot of I think it was there because it was the Caribbean, and a lot of these tags ended up circulating. A lot of the fish ended up circulating in an area east or west of. Let me pull the geography up. Some of those islands down there, like Guadalupe. There's a place west of there. Yeah, like to the east of Martinique and St. Lucia. There's an island out there called Isla Alves. This whole little area in between, it's a giant area actually, between this place called Isla Alves and Martinique and St. Lucia. There's this seamount chain that I found very interesting, that they all, I don't know, I couldn't tell if they were all there at the same time, but a lot of them intersected that area.
And I was there are a few, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. There are a few areas of the ocean where no matter where the fish is tagged, if it's within a certain distance away, they usually will go there at some point or another. And that may be just one of the Caribbean spots that has the best the most upwelling. There's probably bait there, so they're probably stopping by there seasonally when it's good. The Kona has a similar place with the seamount there, and Costa Rica used to be that way when it was all seamounts, and now there's so many pads on the seamounts that there's just their pick of food, so they're getting fat and hanging out there.
Are they traditionally, like, I guess they're far, even though we tag them in a certain area, that the areas you see that they congregate, are they normal, traditionally good fishing locations, or are they kind of out there in the middle of nowhere?
No, they're the places you expect them to go. There's one thing when it comes to fisheries, like, all of this is still, it's not new, but the technology we're using, the science is relatively new compared to a lot of other sciences. But the
Mhm.
fact of the matter is people have been fishing these for hundreds of years. People have been fishing the ocean, and nobody knows more about where these fish are than the guys out there fishing. So, like the popular spots, the canyons, the seamounts, those kind of areas, that's typically where they're going to be. Like I'm sure there's some unknown things like deep seamounts that nobody fishes, but that these fish, because these fish do travel in the open ocean.
Or just like, yeah, that's what I was less about maybe just an area where two currents intersect or push together or something like that. Like maybe
Yeah,
sea condition,
And there are areas where they're not permanent, so the
Yeah.
Gulf Stream's a good example. The Gulf Stream will spin off eddies. So there's a lot of shear on the edge of a fast moving current where you have fast moving current on one side and then, steady current on the other, and that'll spin off, these eddies. And that's really a good opportunity to have a parcel of the ocean that can have everything retained within it, where the Gulf Stream is going to evict everything away right away because it's so fast. But an eddy that spins off, a good example is down in the Keys. Like my boat's down on Kojo Key. There are times a year when there's an eddy close to shore. The fishing changes significantly. A couple of years ago, more than a couple of years ago, I guess about 10 years ago now, maybe a little more, the group at was down there collecting samples, and they found a ton of baby sailfish in that eddy. And it turned out that the sailfish were using that eddy to spawn. And that was really good for sailfish because that eddy would hold them within it. They wouldn't get sucked up into the Gulf Stream and get taken too far away. It's also, it's a region where it's going to hold all the nutrients and all the things that the little sailfish eat. And then, you hope there would be a little bit less predation, but it's just a really good opportunity. The same thing's happening in Hawaii and a lot of other places. There are a lot of different oceanographic features that can drive like a productive area. Eddies are a good one. Wind driven currents are another one. And just upwelling because of the way the world turns. You have upwelling on the eastern sides of the ocean. And that basically changes the dynamic of east to west, and that's why fish tend to get bigger on the eastern sides. You tend to get the biggest blue marlin in the eastern Atlantic, right? And you get much bigger sailfish in Guatemala and Costa Rica than you do in Florida, and it's because there's more particles, there's more prey, there's a different food chain completely. So it's not just like underwater seamounts, bathymetry stuff. It can be just an open ocean current that has the right kind of shear that just accumulates prey. Because these fish, they don't know where they're going when they're traveling across the open ocean. Like they only know where they are now. They're not like salmon where they're going to their natal stream. They're just kind of traveling along and finding a productive area. So if they find it, they stay there for a little while. And, if that happens to be just something, an eddy that's spun off and is traveling across the ocean, then why not stay there?
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Fishing up here at Ocean City, and then I understand a lot about the eddies, and I get really excited when we get 2 or 3 of them lined up. But
yeah,
we have one right now, and it's off of New York, and God, I hope it makes it somewhere within range of here.
I was thinking of when you said Pacific and
I-
Atlantic, but the sailfish from Atlantic Pacific, are they the same exact species?
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, they separated them, but genetically they're pretty close. So it's not really a separate species. What's different is they grew up in a different place. Yeah,
they do tend. Obviously they're a little tanner in the Pacific, but even the sail seems to be different at times.
There are times when they look, because we've tagged, or my old lab at tagged, I think probably like 75 sailfish, and they're some really big ones, and one's well over 100 pounds, almost 150 pounds, and they look different. Their colors are a little different, but genetically they're not too different. So it's more just a product of their environment.
And you're talking about that eddy that produced a lot of sailfish spawn. Do you know? And I guess, are you aware if they spawn like on the calendar, or are they more opportunistic spawners? Like that seemed like if the conditions are right, they spawned right there. There was a lot of them probably together.
I think it's a combination of both. I think there's probably a season that would span, spring through the summer into early fall. And then that eddy just happened to hit it at the right time. I don't particularly remember the spawning season. Like a lot of this stuff for billfish is you can look it up online and it'll say, blue marlin spawn from May to June or May, whenever. But there's a lot we don't know.
Nobody
about
really
these
knows.
species. And no one's seen it. We found little blue marlin and we can say, well, this thing's about 7 days old. Where could it have come from? It could have come from, these general areas, and then we can guess. But there's
still could,
it
could be 100 miles away.
Exactly. Yeah, and with the combination of currents and all that stuff, like you really, and even the age and growth information we have for billfish is not what you'd expect it to be. There's a bunch of papers out there from all over the world. Everywhere in the world it's going to be a little bit different because it's a different environment, and they're not growing the same. And some of them are just it's hard to believe that it's even true. So it's and like you think something like, how old does a billfish get? You can read 3 papers and it's going to tell you, one will say 20. One will say 30 and one will say 45. And it's really tough, and it's something that's really kind of limited our ability to assess them. Billfish are doing okay in some places, they're not doing so great in others. And what we're trying to do is push these different so billfish are managed by international management councils. In the Atlantic we have ICAT, and in the Pacific you have IATTC and the Western Central Pacific Commission. And we're in the process of dealing with a recent striped marlin assessment that just came out, and you look through the data and you see the results, and it's not really good enough to make a determination on what we can do to get striped marlin back where they should be. And it's mostly just we don't know. We don't have a good enough idea of what the catch is. Like they're trying, it's a lot of smart people working on it, and they're all doing their best, but it's taking time. So we got to find out how many are being caught, and then you need all of the right biological information. You need to know, is that group in Hawaii, group of striped marlin in Hawaii, mixing with the group in Southern California? Are they mixing with the group in Mag Bay? And are they mixing with the Japanese side? The fish that they're catching off Japan. That's really where the great marlin race comes into play, because we're the only ones collecting that kind of information. The fisheries collect it, but you only know where that fish was caught. With a satellite tag, every single place that fish has been over the course of however long you have the tags out for. So, striped marlin right now is the hot topic in the Pacific. But we've had fish tagged in Southern California and Mexico that went all the way over to Hawaii and then started coming back. And these assessments aren't taking that into account. We're trying to get that, every step is better. We can get better at assessing these, and we have a more confidence in our ability to manage these stocks based on the information.
How does it work? Like when you're dealing with a legislative, with the government basically, and legislation, when they're asking for data and you try to give them data, like we have people here in Ocean City that ask us every day, they come down to the dock and they ask us every day what we caught, how we did, everything like that. And they're like, what's the water temperature? How deep are you fishing? But they don't have a great understanding of like the actual conditions and why the fish are there. And these people are just collecting the data, but maybe I fear that sometimes that maybe I'm wrong, because I've never really talked to whoever's assessing the data or the scientist is looking at it. But we've had awful fishing here in Ocean City. It's not because the white marlin are endangered. It's not because, yellowfins are not endangered. That might be the case for the yellowfins. I feel like there's just less there now than there was 20 years ago. But we just have bad conditions for what those fish like to live in, and we have a lot of green water, and we had a lot of west wind earlier in the year, which kind of kept those eddies from breaking off the Gulf Stream and kept them all the way up to the north. I just sometimes fear that scientists that aren't fishermen like have a little bit tougher time grasping, because they're just looking at the data and not a picture of the ocean to go with the data. I just think that maybe they're just looking at the numbers sometimes.
Yeah,
Kind
and
of
I think that's a lot of the way fisheries work. Is they're just your only option is to look at the numbers. But all of those get put into you're never really looking at one particular day. Yeah, that's all going into the data, and they're looking at trends over time. And I was just up in Ocean City, and I agree. I was we grew up. Zach and I both grew up outside of Philly and fishing out of Jersey, and did a little bit of offshore. We were total amateurs, but we were trying our best. And
Speak for yourself.
No, me and the people I was fishing with were total amateurs. And I could tell there's a ton more tuna now. Like if we got one or two tuna, we were pumped in the late 90s, early 2000s. And the water was green the last time I was up there. I was on a boat. I was on a Hatterascal with Terry Robinson. We were putting out tags with we have a grant from Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's Outdoor Fund. So we had a whole big group going there, and the crew from the Big O was fishing on the Hatterascal. It was awesome. It was a cool trip. But fishing was pretty slow. It was pretty slow during the tournament too. And some of the guys in Cape May that are affiliated with IGFA were doing pretty well. And just wondering, is it that much better up there? I looked a little bit at the chlorophyll maps, and it's, it's kind of hard to tell. They weren't so great. But I think when you have those kind of people come to the dock and they ask you, how many fish did you catch? What was all of this stuff? One thing that I think a lot of anglers don't consider, and especially commercial guys, they don't realize that if you lie to them and say, "Oh, I didn't catch anything," that will result in them thinking there's fewer fish out there, and that there's fewer fish available to be caught, meaning that the stock is in worse health than it really is. And that's going back to striped marlin in the Pacific. I'm fairly confident we don't have all the proper catch data from some of the other countries, and it's basically I think there's more fish out there, or more fish being caught than we realize, but they're not being captured in that data. So it's the kind of thing where I would always recommend tell them exactly the situation, because there's no real way it can hurt. I think over time they build up those databases and they say, this was a situation, and you can go back, and whoever's analyzing that data, because the people collecting it probably aren't the ones that are going to analyze it years down the road.
Yeah, for sure.
They can go back and link every one of those to a day, and then they can link that to the conditions, and somebody can build this, serious assessment of what was happening at that day and time. So I would, I would give them all the right information. I know a lot of my friends, especially some of my friends in Jersey, they're always like, no, they call me up on the phone, and I never tell them the truth. I always tell them I didn't catch anything, and it's like, no, tell them you caught stuff, or they're going to take it away from you.
Yeah.
Do you have before we switch over, but do you have any what's a long sailfish track you got from a South Florida sailfish? Do you have any crazy journey?
We haven't. No, we actually have not. Sailfish are tough for satellite tagging. They're very difficult to keep a tag in. So I don't, as far as I know, the IGFA has never put a satellite tag on a sailfish. I actually was out with one of our sponsors is Edgewater Boats, and they have one tag. And I went out of Stewart last year and a half ago, and we were kite fishing to go put this in a sailfish, and I said, I don't think we should do this, because every place we stopped, sharks showed up, and it was like, if we put this in one of these little sailfish, there's a monster bull shark behind the boat for a while. I was like, this thing's going to get eaten right away. But in the Pacific side, I think the best sailfish. So there's a lot of unique stuff happening between Costa Rica.
Nick only asked that question because he wants to know where the sailfish go when
I wish I could tell you
20 out of the northwest.
No, I wish I had the answer for you, but we have not done that. They need to invent a smaller tag, or we need to start.
They go lay in the sand, Nick.
On the bottom in 1200.
Yep.
So, but yeah, we have gotten some cool ones in the Pacific. They don't usually hold the tag in very long, but all the way up the coast from Costa Rica to Guatemala, or from Panama to Guatemala. So,
do the blues and the blacks tend to hold a tag better because they're bigger fish? Because I feel like most of the places that I've seen good data on seem to be mainly blue and black, kind of heavy areas.
Yeah. I think the bigger ones is just more meat. It's more meat to hold that dart in there. you know, I think we've, for whatever reason, Kona and Bermuda for us are the best. I don't know if it's because the people that we work with there are people that do it all the time, that have done it with us for years, or if it's because the behavior of that fish is just a little bit different that it holds the tag in. I
And the
always
tackle
said,
and the tackle you're catching it on, typically those are big, heavy tackle locations.
Yeah,
You know, you're gonna actually
exactly.
get them up, get a good shot.
Right. Yeah. And you know, I think what was I gonna say? In Central America, we have a really hard time keeping the tags in for very long. And I think we're not alone in that. I think all the groups have a hard time with retention. And I think, and I don't know how much you guys have fished down there, but you see a ton of free jumpers, more so than I think anywhere else I've ever fished. And I think that has something to do with it, because this free jumping fish is about the worst possible situation you can have for a satellite tag. So, you know, it's I think they're just ripping it out. That's the only thing I can think of for why it's so much worse in one location than another.
And how much is a tag, by the way?
So it depends on the tag, but right now the sponsorship cost is about 4,000. Depending on it's anywhere between 4,000 and 5,000. And that, you know, part of that includes the fact that you have to pay for satellite time. It's an Argos satellite system, so you actually have to pay them for every tag, and then how long they're transmitting, and you have to pay just to have it open and use the satellites. And then, you know, everything in this scientific tagging world is expensive. You know, the darts are made out of titanium and Kevlar and all sorts of stuff. So it's not a cheap endeavor. And then you need to have someone that can analyze the data. So, you know, all of that factors in. So anywhere between $4,000 and $5,000 usually.
I mean, there's some people rolling around the sport fishing industry. If it gave them an advantage, they'd buy 100 of them tomorrow.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Like, some people are not. They're like, oh, that's cool. That's really interesting. Let me get 5 tags. It's like, yeah, sure, that sounds great. But yeah, it's. I mean, from my perspective, it's expensive. It's expensive as hell. But
yeah, absolutely.
You know, like, we're getting a ton of data, and it needs to be done. Someone's got to be collecting it, and I think the system we've put together here, and well, I didn't put it together, but the system that IGFA has is working really well.
I assume you do a fair amount of work with the Billfish Foundation as well.
A little bit. I'm good friends with them. I known Peter for a long time, and everyone there. But yeah, I think we complement each other pretty well. We're definitely, you know, they do their tags are obviously very different. They're using spaghetti tags, so they get, you know, when the tag was deployed, and then when it was you know, when it was recaptured, and that gives really cool information. And that's something that over time you do thousands and thousands, because they're only a couple cents each, and then, you know, you get overall information on migration. But like, we're more interested in, you know, the more fine-tuned movements, so that we can figure out why fish are going, where they're going, when they're doing it.
Nick,
but yeah, a lot of the political stuff, like, we certainly align on all that. So
have you ever caught a tag fish tank? How many?
I mean, not a ton, but a handful of sales. We actually had one at the end of this year. I didn't retrieve it, but jumping around with it, we try to get it, but they're not so cooperative all the time.
No, I've only ever caught one. Pretty interesting.
I mean, it's really uncommon. There's actually a lot of science you can do with that too. And you know how many tags are put out. And then, you know, you get like a probability of that fish being recaptured based on how many have been recaptured and put back out. And you get some really interesting information on how many are out there that way.
Yeah.
I probably pulled, I mean, my whole life, probably pulled 3 off fish, and maybe had a couple other ones we didn't retrieve.
Did they tell you where it came from?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really remember off the top of my head, but I do remember one, I remember specifically that the tag, you know, obviously they're that bright orange color, and this one was completely algaed over.
Yeah.
So it was on there probably decent amount of time, and I think it was tagged like in Key West like 3 years prior or something, and we caught it in Miami, you know, 3 years later or something.
The one I caught, Rich Barrett caught, and it was like 30 miles away.
That's
2
funny.
years. 2 years before that. 2 years before that, it was only like 30 miles away. So interesting.
Cool. Yeah, that happens a lot. I was talking to Bouncer at the Palm Beach boat show last year, and he was saying that he had just caught one, and it was within a mile of where he had deployed it like a year before. And it's like, you know that fish went all over the place in between and just happened to get it right on that at the same time of year. It's really, really cool stuff.
I think I'm pretty sure it was maybe like a year or two ago, one of my buddies pulled a tag off, and I think that same fish was caught like 2 weeks prior, that the tag was 2 weeks old.
Yeah.
And that fish ate like 5 miles away. Pretty funny.
Well, that's good to know. I mean, it's good to know that they're not being impacted by that whole process. You know, there's actually a new paper just came out from Guy Harvey's group that looked at hourly how they recovered over time. They actually put like cameras on these fish in Panama and looked at, you know, how they were recovering, you know, 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hours after they were caught, and they use like accelerometers and all sorts of stuff to estimate it. It's a pretty interesting results. I don't want to misquote it, but I think it took like it was like an 8 hour to get back to its normal behavior or something like that. And then when I did my research, it was like you know, we looked at patterns and how they move around, and I think it was like 14, and after 14 or 15 days, believe it or not, after it was caught, it changed its pattern, and they almost all did it. So there was something about, you know, like 14 days later that it actually changed its searching behavior. That actually goes back to the question you asked before about, you know, do they get right out of there? And it's like, it seems like about 14, 15 days, they do something different, and then they change and go to their, you know, normally scheduled behavior, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wondered about that, you know, like, I mean, I'll never stop fishing, but it's interesting that you catch and release, like you talk about guys going to certain places, Mag Bay, Guatemala, you know, something like that, like going catching, you know, 100 a day. And you're like, what impact is that? I mean, probably almost all of them survive, but it's like, what effect does that have on, you know, if you're catching 100 a day, the effect of 100? Do they, you know, I'm sure they all act different because they're all their own fish, but it's just interesting to see.
I mean, it's something that the management definitely they try to account for that. You know, we have in the Atlantic, we have a quota for white and blue marlin. I think it's 250 fish, and so they're trying to account, even though there's really no good way to do that. But it's such a small percentage that are dying. Like, of all the tags that we've put out, we've had very few of them die, and it could be because people are taking extra care to revive them. But, you know, if you're not doing anything crazy with it, you're not fighting them for hours and hours, like, that fish is almost, you know, and you're not gut hooking it, obviously. You know, that fish is most likely going to survive. The mortality rate is pretty low. It's usually like, you know, there's a few different papers out, but anywhere between like 5 and 17% at the very high. But yeah, if you revive the fish, or if you don't fight it for too long, it's pretty minimal impact.
Interesting.
Cool.
Well, Bruce, that was like, we could go on for hours about this. I feel like we might have to do another one.
Yeah, happy to do it. I can talk about this all day.
Zach's turn. Me and Nick are just gonna argue, or just like wire some rules and can't
Yeah, trust me,
Right.
I've heard everything, so I'm ready. Hit me with your best shot.
I actually don't have any real issues with any of the rules. I wish they would enforce them a little bit stringent, more strictly up here in Ocean City. I mean, I feel like it's kind of, every year it seems like the tournaments up here get more and more jungle rules, and I'm like, I just kind of like the idea of 30-foot leaders and, you know, things like that. I feel like it's, you know, there's got to be some standard to work with, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a big thing I deal with. It's like I take calls all day long. Like I have an open number. You can look me up on IGFA.org. If you have like any questions, you give me a call, and I'm happy to go over stuff with anyone. And like a lot of the questions I get are guys complaining about tournament, either results or like rule infractions and things like that. And the tough part from us down here is like, so we create our international angling rules, right? And all these tournaments are based off it. It's, you know, it's the gold standard of fishing rules, but they're within their rights to adjust those however they see fit. So I'll have guys call down and be like, you know, hey, this happened and it's illegal under your rules. And I'll be like, yeah, that's true. But you know, like the Mid-Atlantic or the White Marlin, it's not illegal under their rules, and you signed off on their tournament when you paid. So you have to accept their decision. And people obviously, they're like, well, you know, the rules are the rules. And I'm like, I agree, man. Listen, they are. And I enforce them. But, you know, it's tough. It's tough in the tournament scene. But I see where the tournaments come from, too. Like, I mean, the big one for us is hook and pass. Like, I mean, that's just the way the sailfish circuit, and even up there, like, that's the way the tournaments have always been fished. And hook and pass for world record fishing is illegal. So like, that's a huge one.
Yeah.
Well, they never allowed that at all in South Florida ever. And now they're
Really?
starting to be open to it, just because they're trying to get more boats to fish.
Really?
And they thought maybe they would get more boats by
Dude.
doing that, but I don't know
I mean,
if that was the
argument
key to getting
the
more
argument
boats.
goes both. Yeah, the argument goes both ways. Like I see why they allow it, especially in like the Northeast, just because they're big money tournaments. And I mean, there's teams that fish it where it's, you know, guys paying to fish on boats. Now, I mean, I'm not advocating for it. Obviously, it's illegal in our rules, but like, you know, it's a lot easier to have that mate that's been out there every single day all summer long to hook a fish and hand it off to a guy and him fight it. But at the same time, like my argument's always, especially for like people have asked us to adjust the rules for junior anglers, right? So allow like hook and pass just for junior anglers for world records. But I just feel like that teaches, you know, the youth kind of like the wrong way to go about doing things. Like you should grow up learning how to hook your own fish and fight them,
Yeah.
you know? So like there's no,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm obviously, you know, biased here, but I think our rules are pretty, you know, fair and, you know, at the end of the day. And like, it is what it is, you know, you should be able to hook and land your own fish.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's got to be fair to the fish too, you know, because we're
well, that's the whole point. I mean, all of our rules are, you know, so it's a fair fight. I mean, it's been that way for 50, 60, 70 years since these rules have been put into play. I mean, like at the end of the day, even right now, any question you guys could possibly ask me, the end all be all of that question is to create the most fair fight, you know, angler against fish. Like at the end, people always ask me, what if I use this? What if I, you know, that's really broad, but I'll be like, hey, if it gives the fish or gives you an unfair advantage in landing the fish, chances are it's illegal.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know why they would do that down there, Nick. I find that baffling about the hook and pass. I know why they do it here because, you know, people, it's not a really, it's more of the tournaments up here are more of just a put your money in and hope you get lucky anyways. I mean, there's world-class teams that come and fish it and have great days marlin fishing, but at the end of the day, nobody really cares if you caught more than anybody that week. It's just who won, you know, and John Duffy's case, $4 million, you know, so, and it doesn't really matter beyond that, which, you know, it's cool in its own right, because I feel like everybody feels like they have a chance and that's the draw. But I mean, in South Florida and Los Sueños, the places, there's teams that really work at it, and you want to reward those teams for going out and working on it, you know. And I feel like the hook and passing is just going to ruin that.
Yeah, there's two trains of thoughts too. I mean, like there's the tournament side to it, right? But the majority of what I do is, I would argue, maybe like 80% or more is world rec fishing. I mean, like that's what these rules were kind of created for. And there's teams, you know, just the same as there's professional teams out there that are practicing all year to go fish these tournaments and, you know, like implementing the rules the right way. There's the same, I mean, it's a smaller group of boats, but there's the same amount of teams that are like, they're world record chasers, and that's what they do. And they're kind of, you know, on the forefront of this, like in terms of knowing every single small detail about these rules. It's tough. I mean, it's hard for an everyday angler, especially like billfish fishing, to go out and like successfully land a fish legally within our rules to earn yourself a record. Because like the second the mate picks up the rod and hands it to the angler, that disqualifies it right there.
Yeah. What is the process to like submit your actually, first, can you go through, I guess we're kind of billfish specific, so we're gonna this is what me and Nick do. We like to stay in our lane because I don't really know much about anything else. So no
worries. I mean, we do it all.
What are the for billfish? Like just the IGFA, just some of the more probably rules that me and Nick kind of know off the top of our head. What are those rules? What are the normal rules for like just fishing in general? Like and then we'll get into what the process is to submit a record. But what are some of the things that you're going to need to know if you're thinking about submitting a record?
So the basic ones, like if you were to tell me I'm going offshore, like I'm trying to set the blue marlin record or the spearfish record or something like that.
Let's just focus on, let's say, blue marlin.
Yeah. So big thing, like before you leave the dock, and this happens all the time. People reach out to me over the phone and say like, hey, I see the 6 pound, you know, line class record is this weight. I think I can beat that. What do I need to know? So what I always tell people is like that the hook and pass one's a big one. The biggest thing, especially if you're chartering a boat, or even if you at the end of the day, I mean, it costs money to go try and like chase after these things, unless you're a dedicated team in a specific region, right? So like these guys are paying to go charter boats to go try and set these records. So I'm like, make sure you talk to the captain, make sure you talk to the mate, and they fully understand these rules. You know, like the big one is obviously the hook and pass is like a huge one, right? That's kind of off the bat, that's going to disqualify you. So always make sure, you know, if that fish strikes strikes, that rod's in the rod holder. You got to be the first person that rod. You know, you engage the fish, even if you pick it up and feed it. That, I mean, that's obviously better. But if it bites in the rod holder, you engage the drag, right? You set the hook on that fish. You got to take it out of the rod holder yourself. If you're fighting in the chair, you got to bring it over to the chair. You know, set yourself down. You have to fight that fish the entire time, you know, without being assisted. That's a big one. You know, like I'm.
But who's to say that those rules are being completely enforced?
And that's a big part of it too. I mean, yeah, it's always, you know, people reach out to me and they're like, how do you know so-and-so did this? Or how do you know that this is all true? And I mean, honestly, we go off of a lot of like faith in people, you know, like, I mean, at the end of the day, like I'm not on that boat with you, right? So what we ask for in terms of proof, and I'll get into that in a bit, I mean, is pretty strict. And I was telling Bruce earlier, like, it's hard to get one past me. I'm pretty confident in my own abilities to like kind of see through stuff. But at the end of the day, like with little things, right? Like there's no way for me to prove whether or not, you know, someone accidentally touched the rod for 2 seconds. It's the whole crew. We ask for witness information, and I reach out for testimony on like big time records, right? So if someone caught the all tackle Pacific Blue Marlin, I'm going to need every single person on that boat to give me a full testimony and describe the entire fight. And that has happened where people have submitted, and not that they're trying to get one past me, that they just don't know the rules, right? And they've submitted for, you know, like let's say a line class Blue Marlin record, and I say, hey, you know, can you give me a brief description of the day, the hookup, the fight, the end game, and everything. And within that, you know, I'm not asking for specifics. I'm not like, hey, I'm pretty sure you cheated or you broke the rules in this specific situation. I'm just like, hey, just give me a good explanation of what you guys did. And they don't know the rules, you know, to a T, and they'll end up being like, oh, well, you know, he was reeling the fish, and I had to move the rod up and over to get underneath it and stuff. And I'm like, that's going to disqualify you right there. It's interesting because, you know, that's one situation where world records kind of has a little more leeway than tournament fishing, especially like sailfish, the circuit, and some of these tournaments that are starting to involve video in the Northeast. Like I'm reviewing video. I work a couple tournaments reviewing video, and like I've reviewed video and seen people, you know, mess up and make mistakes.
Oh, you'll see up here in the Northeast, it'll be. Chaos,
this year was interesting.
Oh
I did the
God.
I did the Jimmy Johnson up in Atlantic City, and I
mean,
when footage.
we did the Jimmy Johnson last year, and people were appalled that there was going to be a video review. Like they were just blown away that this was going to be a thing. And I was just like,
it's interesting for me coming from, so like I grew up there, right? I grew up fishing the canyons at a canyon club in New Jersey. So like I know those guys. I grew up around those boats. Like I know how they operate. And then I came down here to school in South Florida. And now I live down here, and I know the sailfish circuit. I know these guys like Nick. And so Jimmy Johnson is interesting because they do a sailfish tournament and they do the one up there. And I've worked both of them. And the footage on the sailfish tournament is pristine. There's 8 GoPros going at the same time. These guys have every hookup. They have the leader touch on everything. And then I got these guys coming back in for the Jimmy Johnson being like, here's my footage of my Blue Marlin release. And it's like 11 seconds and the phone's sideways and I can barely see the fish. And he's like, yeah, that's good enough, right, man? That you guys can see that fish, right? I'm like, yeah, I mean, I can, but it's not the best, you know. Next year, let's try and get another GoPro going or something so we can, you know, get a better ID. But no, I mean, so there's certain situations where I'm relying on you to tell the truth. And at the end of the day, I mean, we're a nonprofit organization. Now, obviously, these records, they mean a lot, right? They've been around forever. And some of these, I mean, Blue Marlin records are kind of one of the most famed, you know, records, and they hold the most water. But at the end of the day, you know, there's a possibility that you could be lying to us, and there's no way we would know. But we go through all the channels we need to go through to, you know, prove that it's true. And I'm confident. I've never approved a record down here and I feel out about anything.
And I feel like, you know, people that do that sort of fishing are super, they're aware of what their goal is and what their reputation may be, and they don't want to impugn their impugn their reputation of them and their crew, you know, just chasing this. They want to do it the right way, you know.
Yeah.
So
no, I'm to answer. I know I kind of just went a roundabout way and never answered your question, but in terms of telling people what to do, I mean, the hook and pass is a big one. Fighting the fish yourself is a big one, and you guys obviously knew that because I said it. You perked up. You can't touch the rod and reel, or the mate obviously can't touch the rod and reel at any point in time during the fight. That's obviously assisting the angler and landing the fish. And then the biggest one for me, and I tell this to everyone, even if you're fishing on a flats boat, is you can't touch the main line at any point in time during the fight. Like you'll have a fish come up, right? And even if obviously I suggest using your all 30 foot of leader that you can use because it gives you a better opportunity to touch it, because that leader touch is what constitutes a release. And at the same time, it's the only thing you can grab and land in a fish. But I have people, you know, reeling a fish, and I've had people submit records with video and it'd be like 100 yards out and have the guy start grabbing the main line. I'm like, well, that right there is gonna.
we had a situation, a special situation on the special situation. This past Mid-Atlantic, my boat, the Blood Bunny, didn't fish it, so I got hired to be the sonar guy, and we hooked a giant wahoo. It skied out on the short rigger. Everybody, I was counting money before that thing landed, and the rigger, we were in a tight turn because we were chasing this thing. We were in a turn and it was on the inside of the turn, so the rigger wouldn't break. It wouldn't pop, and it's on an 80. And the mate starts pulling down the line to pop it out with his hand. I'm like, no, don't touch it. And I was like, you can't touch it. So I'm like, run it back up, and then we'll straighten the boat out and it'll pop. Well, he ran it back up and it was in a swivel rod holder and the rod just flies out.
Jeez.
And thankfully, he was tethered to the side of they actually like use the tether line, which I never do. But they had this thing tied to the boat, and that thing flew out and it finally let go. And we still had that. We ended up catching the fish. And I mean, honestly, I think we beyond like the hook and pass, because we did set the chair, and I think it, if the guy if
the mate was the one that ended up fighting that fish, that's fine. I've had that question. I've had that question posted. I've had somebody reach out and be like, what if the rigger doesn't break and I have to manually pop it myself? Well, yeah, that's legal, as long as you're the one that then picks the rod up and fights and lands the fish. I mean, just
okay, so but if the thing's hooked, like it was hooked, like take and drag, it just didn't pop. Can you grab and pop the main line out, even if you're the
you're the angler? If you're the angler.
Gotcha.
So I've there's situations too where like
interesting.
This is interesting too. I've had a lot of people reached out to me before the white marlin started swordfish this year. And I had like 8 or 9 boats call me and be like, I want the IGFA rules about sword fishing. It's tough because IGFA angling rules, you can't use an electric reel, right? So that's most day timing setups are electric reels. So you're going to have to hand crank it. And then another thing too is you're not fighting that fish in the rod holder, which a lot of those guys are doing. It's a bent butt in the rod holder. You're going to have to take it out and fight it yourself. And then the biggest thing is you have that weight, like who knows how far up, 200 feet up.
Mm-hmm.
And the mate can't come and unhook that long line clip. Like he'd be touching the main line at that point. So I had to go, 8 ways from Sunday trying to explain to these guys that, and they were like, well, what if he just touches it for a second? And I'm like, that's a risk you're willing to take, then that's fine by me. Like if he can get it off without touching that main line and it's just 1 split second, that's legal. But the second he trips and falls and he pulls down and puts any tension on that main line, you disqualifying yourself. So like,
but if you're touching the clip, let's say the rod tip, because this is a question that we've experienced a ton in South Florida with kite fishing, because you have that all the time where your sailfish out there jumping and it's not popping from the clip, and they you pull the kite in as fast as you can, and typically the angler will do it. But we've all seen where people will like take a needle to the clip and pop the actual clip without touching the ring.
Dude, if they do that with a needle and the nonsense you fish with, dude, good on them, dude. That's impressive.
I'm trying to picture that right now. That would be legal. I mean, as long as
we have a ring, you have the ring there.
Yeah, that's wild. You've seen that before?
Oh yeah.
You've had a mate go over there and do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the fish is pulling steady. You get the clip. You could get the clip right to your hand, and you could just take a second, or you could just back off the swivel. I mean, back off the clip, and it's just going to pop.
Yeah,
out.
that's true. That's what I was.
But you're super careful about not touching the main line. Most people would just reach over there and pop it out with their hand. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And that, for me, like I deal with a lot of teams who are well versed, right? Like I get calls from captains just like yourselves, like highly respected captains. But at the same time, I'm getting calls from
nobody
just
respects.
I'm getting calls from like I would call them like good old boys, just guys that are like, especially down here in Florida. Like I get a lot of Florida guys that are just they're trying to get out there and they see a record's available and they're like, we're gonna go get after it. And I'm like, listen, guys, you really got to understand these rules. Like someone like Nick fully understands that mate can't touch that line, but that's just common practice, right? Like if you're gonna, if you see it stuck there, you're gonna rip it out yourself, and that's gonna disqualify.
And you would think that people on our boats would know the rules, but I've had some meltdowns.
Heat of the moment stuff too. I mean,
oh my God, it's like they forget everything. They've been fishing for 25, 30 years, and they just start doing stuff. It's shocking.
No, I mean, I hear all the time from people. They'll tell me like, oh, I'm going to Hawaii to set this blue marlin record, and then 2-3 weeks later they'll call me back. How was your trip? Like, I had the fish. I told the crew beforehand, nobody touched the rod, let me pick the rod up. And the second that fish struck, the mate just ran over and grabbed it and handed it to me. And it was the record and immediately disqualified it. And I'm like, yeah, tough. You have to make sure everyone's on the same page. There's a lot, to catch, especially, talking about Marlin records, they've been around for so long that the majority of them are pretty large fish based off their line classes. So like to beat one is a miracle in and of itself. You're gonna have to find that perfect fish that you probably catch 100, 200 blue marlin trying to find that one fish. And then to have something that, is clearly avoidable, that you've probably practiced and told the crew about 1,000 times happen, that has to just, crush you. I haven't seen it in person, but I've heard a lot about it since I've been in this position.
I would just go in. I would just give it one day. Just be like, you people, here's the money that you guys say you wanted for this charter, and I would just go and find somebody else.
It takes a specific crew.
That's super. I'm still blown away that you guys do that, Nick, with the needle. I just could see some dude in a flat brim hat and 20 knots of wind just reaching out there, freaking popping the needle, putting the rigging needle in there, popping it out. That's badass.
Yeah, I'm like 6'2".
It gets really tricky when you have somebody on the rod that really doesn't understand what's going on, because especially in heavy wind, that you have to bring that rod tip.
You have to bring it back here
perfectly.
Yeah.
Well, you have to make it run with the kite line, because if not, all you do is you slingshot the clip 100 feet right back out, and then you just fucked it. So it's just like, and you see that a lot. Like, hey, point the rod right to the mate, but don't touch the mate, and you're gonna point it, and he's gonna loosen the clip for you or whatever. But then they gets close, and then they get excited, and they put the rod tip the other way, and it just sends the clip 100 feet up the line. You're like, all right, well, we'll figure that out.
Do it all over again. And then
we've had we've had this a couple times too. Is I don't know exactly how many we've actually caught in this scenario, or what the tournament committee would count as a catch. But when you have big multiples, and we basically just wrap a sail in the main line, like he's really not even hooked, but they'll just completely wrap themselves in the main line. But we could, so there are very few times we've actually had them next to the boat, and the director of the tournament would say, if you could have them within a gaff or range of in the video, if you could put a gaff tip and kind of touch the fish, then they would count it as a catch. Obviously,
dude, if you were in first place and I was in second place and I heard something like that went on, they'd be hearing from me, dude.
That's the interesting part of my job, right? Because like I said, those tournaments are within their rights to adjust those rules however they see fit. They also enforce them, right? So I get every call. Like every call comes down to me. I'm in second place in this tournament, and this is what these guys did in first place. I'm like, that. Here's how we would handle it, right? So like, for example, in that case, that's technically, like, if you're touching that main line, that's not considered a release. Like, I understand. And also, you have to.
No, I'm not saying touch the main line. I'm just saying, like, he would just say you get the fish close.
No, I get what you're saying, but yeah, like we wouldn't count that as a release. You'd have to, bring the fish all the way in. You'd have to fight it. You'd have to figure out a way to untangle without someone else touching the line. Pretty much, you'd be screwed in that situation.
Yeah.
Well, you got that. That's an example of why those tournament directors are like, we have to be strict and by the letter of the law for these records and for our angling rules. But as a tournament director, like, obviously you can't ask someone within those sets of rules to figure out a way to resolve that situation. So they're just going to be like, all right, well, you brought it close enough. It's basically a caught fish. We'll count it. Oh. Which is, it's a sticky situation, because then you have someone else who is one fish away from being in first place, and they get put in second place, and then they're pissed because they're out of their money. And it happens all the time.
Can you define a mutilated fish for me?
That's actually, I've got a ton of calls, and I don't know what I can speak on it because I haven't seen the pictures yet, but I got a ton of calls about the Mid-Atlantic 500 today, this morning. That's what I walked in at 8 a.m. But so basically, it's the two main things are sharks and then boat, right? You can't injure the fish. So the argument is, and at least in our rules, if you injure the fish, it's inhibiting its ability to fight, and therefore it's disqualified because
injure the fish prior to like gaffing it or while
correct
gaffing it.
or
that's like,
obviously you can't injure the fish with the gaff. That's the process of gaffing the fish. That's understandable. I've had people submit records, and I've asked for testimony, like, hey, there's a giant hole in and like right behind the dorsal fin. They're like, oh, the mate missed the first gaff shot, here's a photo of it happening. That's understandable. But like,
what if the gaff rips out?
That's happening.
Like, leaves a giant gash in the back.
Yeah, if that's explainable, and everything is up for debate, right? So I sit there, I ask for testimony, and the mate says the gaff ripped out. Here's a photo of the gaff. Even if he doesn't have a photo of the situation, like, here, he explains, he makes his case the best he can. You know, I take note of that, I process it, and we'll get into this when we talk about the records. But the way it works is, I can get into it now. The record comes across my desk, right? You know, I have the world record application form. Just to go over the basics, so like what I need from you for any record is world record application form filled out, completed, all the information. I need a photo of the angler with the fish, the rod and reel used, the scale it was weighed on, and the scale needs to be certified. And I need a photo or a copy of that scale certification. And then I need your whole setup. So I need, you don't have to send me the lure, but I need the hook still attached to the leader, and then 6 meters of the main line. So they're like 16.5 feet. I always just ask for 20. Just so people are on the safe side. Because so what's going to happen is I'm going to test that line. If it's a line class record or if it's an all tackle record, it has to break under 130. So you're going to send me all that stuff, and then I'll process it. It enters our database as pending, and then it gets, you know, okayed by me. And there's 2 other members of the review committee, marketing director Jack Vitek, and then Jason Stratweiser, our president. He has the final say. So all 3 of us get together. We will say it's either approved or rejected. And let's say it is rejected. Let's say this specific scenario, you know, the guy provides testimony. He says, oh, it was just a flying gaff, you know, ripped out of the fish. We don't believe him, you know, for whatever reason. If we reject it, he still has the ability to put that up to dispute. And then we have a rules committee. It's made up of a lot of our trustees and, you know, some guys, some big name guys. And that'll go to that rules committee, and they'll sit down and they'll vote on it, whether or not it should be reinstated. And it's happened in the past where we've rejected a record for, you know, a rule infraction that there was a gray area on, and we've had the rules committee, you know, meet, vote, and allow for the record to be approved. So
Gotcha.
that's a long-winded answer to your question. But
What about throwing a rod in the water?
you can't do. I get what you're saying. You can't do that.
You can't do
Just
that.
as like you also can't splice.
Yeah.
You,
Well,
like line to line.
I have never done that, but I've known people that have, and that's
Oh yeah,
caused
no, I mean,
controversy.
yeah, there's cool stories. I mean, that's
Yeah.
always cool stories. But it'd be like,
I
for
mean,
tournament,
we've
that's
thrown
not-
rods over plenty of times, fun fishing. I don't know if we've ever done it in a tournament, or I think
I
maybe
don't
we
think you
wanted
can in a
to.
tournament.
Well, I think
Yeah.
we've asked and they told us we couldn't.
Yeah, a tournament director, and I found this out now being around a few of them, is that anglers and captains are always going to ask every single scenario possible leading up to it in terms of rules.
Well, it,
you know, like
and it
there's
happens,
no.
it happens to us a
'cause-
lot, you know, where
yeah,
you get
'cause
you
the-
hook 3 or 4 fish and you just get one fish that is just so
Yeah.
long, and you're just like, well,
But there's
give
the
it our
tournament
best
director is
shot.
he's always going to be like, you know, his go-to answer is going to be no in most scenarios, right? Because it's always going to be like, you know, there's a gray area to every single rule where, you know, there's some specific odd scenario where there's nothing, you know, there's rules in that are, you know, catered towards it, but the exact language isn't in there. And if you're the guy that's sitting, you know, spot out of the money, and that rule is what's up for grabs, there's going to be arguments to be had. And like those tournament directors are always going to say no in most of those cases because they're trying to cover themselves, which is understandable.
Yeah, for sure. Couple just general things that I feel like maybe people should know. Or if you could explain the gaff length, the leader length, and the hook placement in the lure.
Yeah, so that's a big one. So for gaff lengths, it's measured from the start of the gaff, the base, to the bend in the hook, and it could be no more than 8 feet. So I've had scenarios where people have submitted records with like 9-foot gaffs, and I've had to reject them. So like we do ask for, if you use the gaff, obviously most offshore cases we ask for those measurements on the world record application form. You know, and same thing with the net too. Obviously you wouldn't use a net for a billfish, but just as I have blue marlin records, I've got salmon records, largemouth bass records. So the net length max is 8 feet as well. For leader length, same situation where there's 2 separate rules. For anything above 20 pounds, so 30, 50, 80, and 130, those are our line class records. You're allowed 30-foot max length of leader, so that's the bend of the hook, to where it connects to either, if you're going to go straight to your main line, or your double line, and you're allowed up to 10 feet of that double line. So it's 30, 10, 40 is the total that your maximum allowable, and everything under 20 and under is 15, 5, and 20. So 15 foot of leader, 5 foot of double line, 20 foot total. Now you guys aren't interested, but freshwater, you're allowed a maximum 6 feet for leader. And
Wait,
then
so our stuff
hook
for the
place,
live bait is 15, 10.
if you're doing anything below 20-pound test, is 15.5. So 15 foot a leader, 5 feet of double line for anything. So 20-pound test, 16-pound test, 12-pound test.
Yeah.
What do you guys usually run? I figured you maybe, I guess you're
15
running 20.
foot. They run 15-foot leaders.
15,
Yeah, no, I
and then
figured
5
mainline.
foot, 5 foot.
Yeah.
Bimini.
And for hook placement, I get asked a lot of questions from guys always call me for the white marlin, call me for the mid-Atlantic, asking about circle hooks, things like that. like a lot of those tournaments are circle hook only, but for IGFA rules, we don't have any distinction on what hook you're allowed to use. You can use J hooks with lures. The hook has to be within the skirt material, so you can't have a hook trailing outside of a skirt material. It has to prevent snagging.
And so basically, the eye of the hook needs to be. Is it the eye or the tip of the
No, it's the bend. The bend has to be within
Okay.
the skirt. Yeah, and
Okay,
then
gotcha.
you're allowed double hooks. They can be no more than 12 inches apart. You still have to be within that material, and that's from eye to eye. And then they have to be at least a hook's length apart from each other, right? So they can't overlap. So the eye of the hook has to start either at the bend of that hook or further back. And that's, I mean, for baits too, same way. Like if you're going to run a double hook in a bait, both hooks have to be embedded in the bait. You can't have a hook free swinging. We've got a lot of recent calls and stuff about the yummy flyers and out in California, because a lot of people are fishing those flying fish, and you have to have, because they're running the trailer hook, you have to either have the hook embedded in it, or you have to, they're using those nomad flying fish. You have to either, attach it where it becomes free swinging. So like you have to put a rubber band around it that breaks away. It's a very intricate situation. We actually have some imagery that we created that, is like a key to kind of see whether your setup's legal or not. That's on our website. But those are kind of like the main hook placement rules that we have for offshore stuff. We have inshore setups as well, and we just kind of made it so we put this in last year. So soft plastic lures. I know you guys probably aren't doing a ton with this stuff, but you're allowed to embed a treble hook or a single hook into your soft plastic lure as a trailer. It just can't be free swinging. So that used to be illegal, and we just made it legal last summer. It's a thing in Europe. A lot of guys are using for like pike fishing and things like that.
Gotcha. Who are obviously the offshore sport fishing guys are definitely the most annoying when it comes to this stuff.
Yeah, I wouldn't say annoying, but I mean, I love getting calls from everyone. I never have an issue with anyone calling me. And it's fun to get the calls from the offshore guys, because I'll see like a 610 or 609 area code pop up, and I'll be like, all right, I know who's calling me right now. Like these are guys in Jersey or Ocean City. And it's interesting because like some of the calls I get are very technical, right? And then other calls are just so broad. And I can picture the guy that's calling me. And he's just like, it's all those guys up there at the Canyon Club and Sunset that I grew up fishing around. And they're just like, hey man, White Marlin Opens, I gotta use circle hooks, right? I'm like, if they're telling you gotta use circle hooks, you do, but for our rules, you don't. I'll give them a call. Yeah, you should give them a call, man. Check with them.
I could see, like, I don't know. I just feel like more so than I'm sure other fishing communities have their egos wrapped up and stuff, but I mean,
oh yeah, I mean, I'm talking.
It's pretty pervasive in the offshore world, that's for sure.
Well, my favorite calls are the guys that call me before tournament, and they'll say like, "Hey, I gotta ask you if this setup is legal," and I'm like, "Yeah, man, you fire away. I'm happy to go over with you." So you can't tell anyone about this. I'm pretty sure I created it, and I'm like, "Hey, listen, if your secret's safe with me, if it's legal, I'll let you know, but I promise I won't tell anyone." And it's usually just a regular setup that I'm sure people are using all over the place, but these guys will be like, "This came to me in a dream, and I'm pretty sure it's going to win me the big rock this year. So I just wanted to make sure. This is a good setup I can use."
Zach gets the best call.
Must have been a blood money guy.
Oh, dude. We got some there on our boat. Stuff comes to people on hallucinogenics, let alone dreams, man. Some of the stuff that we've put out there, I'm like, oh, and we just end up going back to the same stuff we always fish.
I was talking to Bruce earlier. Like I love some of the calls I get, because the imagination's amazing, and like a lot of the things people are asking me about, I think would work. But they're always so concerned about it, and I'm like, hey man, maybe just go back to the things that have caught thousands of billfish in the past, because those are legal and they're already pretty well accepted. And he's like, yeah, I'm thinking this one's going to be the one that makes a difference though. And I'm like, hey, go for it.
Nick, I always feel like I'm sure people ask like, what do you do? I don't know. I'm just like, I don't know, same thing everybody else does. I just copy it. I'm not reinventing the wheel. Look at me, dude. Look at who we're fishing on the blood money. We are not. Nobody on our boat is reinventing the wheel, man. We're just trying to keep up.
Are there numbers, records? Is that like a?
That is something that we need to keep track of.
So I would be all for it. We don't, but I think it's really interesting. I mean, I grew up, like we've been saying a ton. Like I grew up out of the Canyon Club, right? So like John Duffy going out and catching all those white marlin. Like when I was a kid, that was like the coolest thing in the world to me, that he went out and did that. So like if we could start keeping it, and down here in South Florida, like every year, even recently, you see guys putting up like 30 sails in a day, things like that, like out of the Keys. Like those are,
Well, yeah,
I
because
think they're
I'll
cool.
see guys, either especially the sailfish, obviously, because it's right here in my backyard. But they're like, oh, new record. I'm like, who's giving you this
no
record?
one's
Yeah.
keeping these records, I promise you, because we're not doing it. But I would love to start doing it.
But
Just
and I think like the Bluebird is that Blue Marlin.
Yeah,
there's a
that-
pretty
yeah.
well-known Blue Marlin Atlantic, which is like 23.
yeah.
Which
And the mag base
until the Salty Fair beats that or something.
and the mag base stuff too. I mean, there's giant numbers coming out over there. It's one of those things where it'd be just cool to keep track of it.
Yeah, and that's tough
kinda-
too. I mean,
Yeah, that kind of, I don't know. I kind of think that, in certain places you need to, I think it'd be cool to do it because it's such a moment in time when, when that fishing was going off up here and Johnny caught 57, like that moment in time was like, the fishing was so incredible. Nobody had seen anything, anything like that.
I was out there that day.
Where
I
were you
remember that. I
fishing?
remember.
I was on the boat.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. That's awesome. I didn't know that. No, I remember coming back. So we were in Sea Dock Canyon Club, and obviously down
Mhm.
Ocean City. I remember coming back and like ADOC, because the ADOC has that Viking demo, and then like Crazy Salts and that like list of big hitters, and every single boat came back with like 20, 30 flags, and we maybe caught 3 or 4 that day. But like Bruce said earlier, we were amateurs, and I just remember coming back and
I
then,
was
like,
amateur.
and then pulling up the phone and stuff and seeing all that stuff coming out of Ocean City, and I was like, wow, that's just crazy to be a part of that, even if I was like a little part of that. And that's the kind of,
I think
that's the cool stuff that makes like when you, not just for being a kid, like even anyone is into this, like this sport, is something that a lot of us like are thinking about 24/7, and like obviously like you can't help it, and like professional sports have like records for everything, and the me being this records coordinator now and getting to look through, like there's some super cool records, and I've had certain records come across my desk for specific species of fish. Like I have to be unbiased, and every record that comes in here I treat with the same level of like I'm reviewing it the same way, and I think each one is unique and cool. But there's certain ones that come across my desk and it'll be like this is a specific example, but I actually have it right here, like junior Blue Marlin, 605 pounds 8 ounces, is just caught its pending right now. Like that's a badass fish, and the kid's 10 years old, and like I got the testimony that said he did everything correctly. I'm just waiting to test the line and stuff, but like for me, like that comes across my desk, I'm like, wow,
that was
that's
Jimmy
awesome.
Davidson, right, Nick?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I've actually, I don't know if this is interesting to the thing, but I have so this is
that
the record
kid's a
jacket.
badass, so I give that kid every credit.
Oh, exactly. No,
There's
he
they're
in
like
here and he dropped all his stuff off. He was so cool to talk to. I was like, man, listen, you're 10
Chris
years old. I
Marlin,
wish I
man.
was
Chris
doing this
Marlin. I mean, dude, that's his name.
He's got it on here. But yeah, no, so I mean, like I have everything. So this is the record jacket, the application's in here. This is the hook and leader that he used. This is the main line. So
Is that a stay step?
I don't actually think so.
No, I don't think so.
No, it's not. No.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I mean, it's super cool. That's the part of stuff where, like, I mean, we obviously try and promote it as much as we can. It's tough for us to promote Billfish stuff because most of these records are being killed and weighed, and obviously that's not what we want to be promoting, considering what Bruce is working with here. But there's certain fish, like that fish for that kid is something I think is cool and should be kind of like celebrated. Just like I think numbers of releases in a day is an accomplishment.
Yeah, and I
I mean,
think
do you think numbers, if numbers would be in like a discussion, like do you think like video would have to be implemented?
That's the thing, and that's the reason why.
Because I think it would have to be, like if you're going to
100%.
and Mag
100%.
Bay, especially the Mag Bay guys, you'd probably have to go out there knowing with
you'd have to have
a
like
camera crew team with memory cards and all that.
Yeah.
But
and that's probably the reason why.
But dude, if you do that and you go out there and you have it on film, I'm like, dude, I think that you deserve a record,
Yeah,
I
agree.
And I agree 100%.
I can definitely tell you that, like,
and like, hold on, sorry, and like just real quick, like a lot of these, especially this, and I'm not trying to like say like my day was better, but everyone goes out there, especially in South Florida, and they have epic days. I've never really had those 50, 40 days like that. But I will say in a 6-line tournament, in tournament hours, 8 to 4, we caught 27. And that was all filmed, perfect
was
to
that,
T.
Were you what boat were you fishing on when you did that?
On the high standards a long time ago.
I was say, because those guys, I talking about working Jimmy Johnson, those guys on, I feel like you definitely know those guys who won 2 years ago on that Jared Bay.
The
So like
Ichi?
46 Joe. Yeah. Those
Oh
guys,
yeah.
Like that day, that final day for them was something like
Yeah,
just me being able to
incredible.
witness it from the radio room was insane. So like things like
No, that's
that.
probably one of the best days of fishing in South Florida you could have right there. I mean, that's up
Yeah.
there. That's another banger day.
And finishing it off with a blue marlin, like, and that's all on video because
Like it's one thing to like catch 50 sails, but like to have it
Dude.
all filmed and have the mate touching the leader.
Yeah.
You know, that's a
Verified.
totally different ball game than just snapping sails off as fast as you can. You know.
Yeah.
Exactly, which a lot of these guys are doing when they're
And
posting these
And that's
Instagram
fine.
posts.
I understand you're going for numbers. You're trying to, put on Instagram, and which not saying you didn't catch 50 or 60 fish, but there is a totally different ball game when you're filming and you have to show the mate on the leader with visual of that fish. I mean, it's completely different.
I can definitely tell you the day on the Billfisher when we caught 57, it was just four of us in the cockpit, and there was nothing IGFA about a lot of those. A third of those fish were not like, I mean, you just hook a fish and put it in the rod holder and throw another bait out and hook another fish till there's 5 on, and like we'd be fighting a fish and then like release it. I mean, I can tell you we got the leader on every fish, but beyond that, it was kind of, and I see where you're coming from, Nick. And honestly, if that were to be the case, I would not I feel like that I would be all for that. But that day, I mean, I can tell you that day, and I can tell you that like other boats were just kind of fishing as fast as they could, which I get it. But if you're gonna go and that's been always their goal, to catch as many fish as they possibly can on that boat. And I'm sure if there's a boat that could do it, catch 57 again, like Nick says, prove it. I'm sure they can do it. But it's just, I think like that really wasn't the goal, which is kind of to catch as many as we possibly could because we were kind of in the moment.
Yeah,
but
you have to. I mean, that's what
if you're gonna start keeping records like that, like obviously the one that I was a part of needs to stand no matter what.
Yeah, well,
it's a precedented before the rules, but after
it's great, grandfathered in. No, I get that all the time. So I mean, a lot of the calls I get, so we have a set number of species we hold line class records for. It's like 227 species, freshwater and saltwater. We just added 3 this past year. It's like sheep's head, bricon, which is a freshwater fish down in Central America, and blue peacock. So I added those. Sheep's head, people have been catching them left and right and submitting them, but I have people call me all the time. Hey, I see you have, arowana. Why don't you have arapaima open for line class records? I see you have this species of that. And it's the kind of thing where like, if we accepted every record for every like line class, it would be so muddled. Like, so these are the records actually behind me here. And this
I was actually going to ask you, are those all the records?
Yeah, and these cabinets are stuffed, and they're breaking away at the seams with the amount of jackets and stuff I have in there. So for us to add, like line classes for every species is just such a daunting task for us here. Because just like Bruce is the only one, working with these Marlin tracks, like I'm the guy. Like if you're catching a record anywhere in the world, calling me, it's coming through this office, and I'm the person processing it. So like for me to start expanding this office, which I want to do, like. For example, if we want to add release records, it would be a lot more work for me, and I need a lot more cabinet space behind me to try to figure it all out.
Sure.
You're gonna need a new warehouse.
Yeah, and then who's to say like geographically, like I feel like those records, those killfish records, or even the weight records, the weight and line class records are more of an individual thing. Yeah, now granted, to go kill a big fish on a blue like you need a team, but like a release record of catching, whatever it may be, is a boat thing.
And I get the same thing for Grand Slams, right? Like, I mean, me being in this position, I'm obviously thinking records, I'm thinking slams, but I'm a fisherman first and foremost, and I grew up fishing, right? Like, if you go out and you catch a Billfish Grand Slam for the boat, not individually angler by angler, that's an impressive day to me. Like, that's something that should be celebrated, right? But for like within our rules, obviously, we can only do it if it's for an angler, so it has to be the same angler that catches all 3 fish, which makes it a more impressive accomplishment because it's kind of tough to do as just the one guy reeling in all 3 species. But at the same time, like if a boat goes out and does that, that's pretty awesome for me and as an angler first, so like that's not recognized by us, but that doesn't mean it's not an impressive accomplishment. And I feel like the same thing would go for this release stuff.
Yeah,
you guys should just start doing it as Billfish, Billfish TV release records. You just start, I'll process this stuff for you. I'll watch the videos.
I mean,
we need someone.
If that's going to be the case, somebody's just going to have to be like, take a 10-second Instagram and be like, we caught 50 today, and we'll just be like, sure, we'll do it. Yeah, it'll be fine. Yeah, I mean, because I was thinking like, people up here in Ocean City, if I hear like this weekend, if the fishing is good within 150 miles, like epic, we'll be there. You know, like and then like we have a rule like in Ocean City, if it's going to count for Ocean City, it's got to be within 100 miles. Now, if it counts overall, then you know who's to say where the geographic location is too. You know,
Exactly.
Like, so like is South Florida the Keys too, or is it somewhere? Because you know, I don't know.
I think that's one of those things where it's just going to be disputed amongst captains and anglers for years.
Oh yeah,
Who caught the most where? Yeah.
Well, there'll be complaints lodged, that's for sure. So
Definitely.
As long as I don't keep the records, I won't hear them.
Well, that was super cool, fellas.
Yeah, that was awesome.
That was not what I was expecting. So that was super
Oh,
fun. I learned a
hopefully good.
whole
that was
hell of a
awesome.
lot from both of you guys' perspectives. And
Hopefully I
I'll
can
be
call
ready.
one of you guys.
I'm
Yeah, I
gonna
was gonna say, give me.
Hopefully I
give me
can call
whenever
for a
you guys
record,
want.
and hopefully one day I'll be calling for a satellite tag. So
yeah, I
That'd
would
be
love to
awesome.
sat tag some fish one day. So
I've
have
got
a world record satellite tag thing going.
There you
Nick,
go. That'd be cool.
I've got a record that I think you could set that may not pique your interest, but I just wanted I can't leave this without letting you know because and hopefully some other people that watch this as well. So we created this new record category in 2011 called All Tackle Length, which is a release category. Promotes catch and release, and we hold it for all of our line class species. I just created a vacancy by adding a fly category to it, right? So it used to be on just conventional tackle and it split between conventional and fly. So that opened up a ton of records there. You can find them on our website, IGFA.org. But we also made it, back in March where it was only held for a certain number of species, and I opened it up for every line class, and that created vacancies for king mackerel, kingfish. Right now, that record's vacant. And the minimum length required to set that record is 75 centimeters, which I believe is like 28 or 29 inches. So to catch the all tackle length world record king mackerel right now, you just need to get this measuring board, which is something that we sell. Catch a fish, using our IGFA angling rules, that's like 30 inches, maybe a little more. Measure it on that device, take a picture of the whole fish and release it, and you'd have a world record. Very easily attainable. No one's done it yet. It's been open for like 5 months. I've been trying to set it myself, but I just eat all the fish that I catch, and you have to release it.
But wait, I don't get it. The fish has to be only 29 inches.
That's
the
like to
it's
qualify.
vacant right now to qualify. It could be, you catch a 45, 50 inch smoker, and that's going to be tough to beat. But like, it's a really available record right now. And like a lot of guys that are fishing out of South Florida are probably catching it every single day.
Oh,
You
every
just
day.
need to have this. Yeah, you just have
kingfish are getting slaughtered
Yeah.
every day.
You just need to have this if you get this measuring device from us and you take a photo of, it's the same with the other records. I need to see like you and the fish, rod, reel, everything. But if you just take a full photo so I can see the head and tail on the same board, so I know that the length is accurate, then that's the world record. I'm hoping that someone sets it with like a 40-inch fish, but the minimum length required is like 28 and a half.
Gotcha.
So that's just throwing that out there.
Well, cool, fellas.
I'll have to.
Oh, we appreciate it. We appreciate you guys having us on here talking.
No, it was
with you.
awesome.
It's been a pleasure.
I
Be in
think
touch.
people will definitely enjoy listening to this one.
I'll have a
Oh, yeah.
complaint one day, Zach. Don't worry.
Yeah, you guys call me whenever. I'll be happy to talk to either one of you.
All right, guys. Well, we appreciate your time, man.
Oh,
We appreciate it. You guys have a good day.
All right,
Thanks.
guys. You too.
Thanks everybody for listening. If this provided you guys any sort of value whatsoever, please visit hookoptics.com and billfishgear.com. And my apologies to everybody. My Instagram got hacked. So if it affected you, I'm sorry.